Welcome from Kissamos. So we are not in the picture perfect postcard town Polyrrhenia anymore. This is a normal place where normal people live. So it's gonna feel a bit greedy, but then again, this is the place's charm. But even in a place which is definitely not touristic, there are going to be little things like this. Here we are in this nice spot above Kisamos, view of the town, but actually there's something more. There is this little interesting place, an abandoned hotel, which I don't know why, but it kind of always draws me in such a place. So let's find out if it's possible to visit it. There's no problem entering it. The gates are open, as you can see. And the places like this officially are off limits. But as you can see, the local artistic souls have a different opinion. They do come here, obviously. And for them, it's a perfect spot because here they can do whatever they want. And nobody really cares. Of course, you know, it's great and good and everything, but one of those days it will fall down. But then again, as they say, no risk, no fun. So here we are pretty much at the top, just below the sign. And it looks like this place isn't abandoned. It looks like it was never finished. Maybe COVID. I'm gonna ask around to find out.
Turns out no COVID involved, but the famous crisis from roughly 10-12 years ago. So that's a little testimony to those bad times. But well, that was just a little beginning of the day. Today we are going to visit many places. It's going to be a long day, and let's start actually with a little flag. If I have any gamers of Europa Universalis watching this clip right now, you guys know what I mean. And if you're not willing to spend hundreds of hours changing history in a computer game, well, keep this flag in mind, because it is going to be important for us today, as we are heading to Episkopi. The name actually simply means bishopry. The thing is, there are around 5 or 10 villages like that in Crete, and in theory, you would think that bishopries should be in at the coast, where it's easier to find them and it's economically better. But because of Venetians, Turks, pirates, whatever else, many of those bishopries for hundreds of years were in the interior, and you can still find them, at least by name. So we are going to visit one of those episcopies, the one close to Kisamos. Welcome to the Archangel Michael's Church.
Now finally it's time for the cool stuff. Now this is what I love best, a good old school church. Now the thing is, you will have here in Crete 2 Byzantine so-called periods. And usually the stuff like this, little old churches, you're gonna have from the so-called second period. Basically the famous Saracens, Arabs came here as well, 8th, 9th century, so more than 100 years Crete was in the Muslim hands. Now the thing is, archaeologically speaking, there's practically nothing left from those times. But what's also practically not left from before the Saracen invasion are the churches. So usually second Byzantine period refers to the 10th century to basically 13th. Maybe, of course, a bit later, during the Venetian period, the Orthodox were still here, and many of them were still looking to Byzantine Empire for reconquest, so to speak. So most of the things you see is 10th to 15th century, if we are talking the Byzantine period. But there's a first, from the fall of Rome in the 5th century to the Saracen invasion. And that's, I think, the only church that still stands from the first period. Now the trick is, we call it the Byzantine Empire, because when Rome fell, ancient times ended. No, they did not. Rome was obviously symbolically important, but it was already a kind of a half important city at the time, the center of the Roman Empire, was here, was in the east. Constantinople was the real capital. So when Rome fell, it wasn't really a big deal for anybody here. As in, yeah, it was not nice, but the Roman Empire still holds. People here weren't calling themselves Byzantines, they were calling themselves Romagnoi, the Romans. So actually, I guess for many of them it was a positive thing that Rome fell, because there were two Caesars in the west and the east. There's no more Caesar in the west. Well, better, there should be only one. And the real one still holds out here in the east, in the Greek-speaking world. So yeah, we call them the Byzantines today, but they didn't see it as, let's say, Western history does it today. They didn't see them as something new, the Byzantines. They saw themselves as Romans. And they hold out 1,000 years more than Rome did. And this is, in front of you, a little show that very often the center of culture did come from here, as in, see the little window, something called Biforium. Now if you see Romanesque churches, you'll see that as well. Now let's think about it for a second. Where did the Romanesque architecture get the ideas from? Maybe from here. Mind you, this is a contemporary of Hagia Sophia in Constantinople itself. Even if it's small, it is old, it is influential, and it is simply awesome.
Now let's have a little peep inside and let's find out what we're gonna have. First, a little mosaic. Unfortunately, not even half of it survived, but it is 6th century and it's in its actual spot, not in a museum, so that makes a nice difference. Now when it comes to the roundness that you could kind of see from the outside, now here it's perfectly in front of you, and I have to say that the shape gives the place a very nice feel of peace and harmony. Unfortunately, what hasn't survived very well are the frescoes, and the older the worse. So here is 6th, 7th century. Well, we can hardly see anything here. Then 8th, 9th century was the famous time of battle of images in the Orthodox world. Nothing is left from that period, unfortunately, as I was hoping to see something interesting. Now here you're seeing later 10th to 12th century. Now those are in much better condition, whatever survived, of course. Unfortunately, not too much. So one last little view, and we are on our way to find something very different. Of course, Byzantine churches are nice and you can find many, but as it is Crete or Greece in general, of course, you would look for something older than that, something from, for example, before the time of Christ. So let's see if we can find maybe a little Hellenistic town.
That's another of my favorites. You've got antiquity with modern life next to it in one little bundle, which is pretty awesome. Now this is the Hellenistic side of Polyrrhenia, or hopefully that's how it's pronounced. Anyway, occupied till the Roman times. So we're going to walk around and let's see what interesting things we can find, but we're not going to do it like this, the selfie way. We're going to walk around properly.
And here's a little surprise. So I was expecting to find Hellenistic ruins or whatnot. Turns out it is actually more of a modern little town with some old parts interspersed. So you are going to find plenty of modernity with old things, but also, well, unfortunately, not simply old, rather deteriorated. Which is a bit of a surprise considering that the town is, at least officially, a touristic spot. Well, anyway, here's a very interesting bit. So you have definitely a piece of modernity here, and that piece of modernity ends right at a Roman aqueduct. So roughly 2,000 years old, which is a pretty nice little touch. You will find such spots, of course, in other parts of town, but also a bit of recycling. So here's an ancient column in a wall. You're gonna see I'm guessing medieval millstone, but also I guess you can see already that the place looks rather abandoned. Well, we are here in October and the weather wasn't good that day, so I'm pretty sure it's giving you a false impression. So here are a couple of photos that look nice. Of course there was green, there was a bit of life, and there were some very cute shops around as well. And here's one. But most of the places were like that. So once again, second part of October and rather bad weather. So don't get discouraged from coming to Polyrrhenia, especially that one thing did not disappoint, and those were the vistas. The views were marvelous. So first of all, once again, Crete are not beaches, Crete are mountains, and here you have a very nice view of that. Not only mountains but hills, of course, and on the hills you're gonna have little villages with a bit of greenery around them, but in the end you will of course see the sea as well. And here you can already, I guess, understand very well why the ancient Polyrrhenians decided to live on the hill where they decided to live. You can control the whole place perfectly. Now here on the horizon you have Kisamos, and in the ancient times it was simply a port of Polyrrhenia, no more. But that's pretty much it.
So yeah, there's not much to see, but then again, that's partly the point. I mean, first of all, the vistas are great, but also I like such places because they're kind of half abandoned, nobody really comes here, which is cool. But also you really need to start flexing your imagination. Basically everything around you, you have to think of it yourself, how people lived, what was important for them, why they chose this hill and not the other. You know, even like a little pile of rocks basically made into a circle. Today for us it's a pile of rocks, but maybe for them 2000 years ago it was an extremely important religious place or something. All those little questions very often without answers, which to be honest is pretty cool, because we always need answers to all the questions. Maybe some things are better left unanswered as an eternal mystery.
After that little bit of pseudo-philosophy, our last point, well, not the greenhouses, although you can see plenty here, but there's another little spot called Falasarna. Today mostly known as another great beach spot, but also a bit of ruins. So let's have a look at both. Now the beach, definitely beautiful, but once again not the most beautiful day. So we just had a little walk, but definitely no dip in the sea. When it comes to the ruins, that's it. Basically, it's today a pile of rocks. But I have a little perversion. I love archaeological museums, even the small and dusty ones. So let's jump into the one in Kissamos and let's give those pile of rocks that we visited today, both Polyrrhenia and Falasarna, a little bit of life. Now the things you see are very simple. You're going to see vases, lamps, even things like spoons, and of course maybe they're not made of gold or anything, but they show you that those pile of rocks were indeed inhabited 2000 years ago, but people like us using very similar tools like we are using today. So I always cherish such places. Of course you want coins, there were coins, but if you want something a bit more impressive, there were of course other things, like maybe a monument or two, some mythological creatures. Here is also a god or a Roman emperor, or actually one and another at the same time. But also a bit of graffiti. Some pilgrims were leaving their names on stones in one of the temples, so that's basically ancient graffiti right there for you. But there were also stones with more important inscriptions. Turns out Polyrrhenia and Falasarna were very good friends, and they were pretty much having alliances, and those alliances were written in stone. So here is just a photo of one, but here is also an actual stone with actual inscriptions. Another alliance between Polyrrhenia and Falasarna. So this is awesome. People 2000 years ago writing things like we have today. If you want to know more, just pause and have a quick look at those two photos for a bit more extra info. But the official highlight of the museum are two mosaics. One big, one smaller. They were already found in one of the villas in Kissamos, and here is the big one. So this is the motif being Dionysus and his herd, so to speak. Unfortunately, we cannot show you most of the mosaic, because one thing that the museum got pretty wrong is the lighting. So unfortunately, we can only show you the bottom of the mosaic, but I think that's already enough to see the very high artistic quality. Now, another of my perversions is looking for swastikas. I know it sounds bad, sounds like Nazi Germany, but turns out that the symbol itself is extremely old. You can find it in many cultures, so I always look for it in museums. And here you can see that the Romans were using the symbol as a motif in mosaics very often. Are you tired? Because we were. After a long day and plenty of visiting and info, looking at those amphoras, which might have held wine, we felt like that's a good idea to end the day. Maybe not wine exactly, but a cute restaurant and product placement. Our favorite beer here once again. So with this image, thank you and good night.